All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another PNP Live. My name is Bashan. I am with the event staff at Politics and Prose. This PNP Live is presented in partnership with Friends of the National World War II Memorial, an organization dedicated to honoring and preserving the national memory of World War II and creating the next greatest generation of tomorrow. Before we go any further, there are a couple quick items I want to go over. The first is that if any of you have a question that you would like to ask of our author at any time, we ask for you to place it in the Q&A box, which you can find towards the bottom of your Zoom screen, not the chat section, just so we can help keep those separate. Speaking about the chat section, the other thing is that throughout this event, you'll be able to go to the chat section, find a link which will take you directly to the Politics and Prose website where you can purchase a copy of The Kitchen Front. We, of course, highly encourage you to do so, and thank you for your patronage. That said, I have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Jennifer Ryan. Jennifer is the author of The Chilbury Ladies Choir and The Spies of Shilling Lane. She is originally from Kent and then London. She was previously a nonfiction book editor. She will be joined in conversation by Sam Smith and his cat. Sam is the public education officer for the Friends of the National World War II Memorial. He assists with educational programs, stewardship, event management, and media relations. He has previously worked for the American Battlefield Trust, where he oversaw more than a dozen national and regional educational conferences, and the National Park Foundation as a grant steward and historian for the National Capital Region. Without any further ado, Ms. Ryan and Mr. Smith.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. Yes, my name is Sam Smith. I work for the Friends of the National World War II Memorial. You've probably seen it on the mall. Unfortunately, I do not work inside the memorial itself. I work in an office nearby. We're the nonprofit organization that supports the memorial. We fund and manage communications events, commemorative events, and educational conferences at the memorial, including book talks just like this one. We do a lot of veterans outreach and assistance, and we assist with the management of the memorial itself and its preservation. A lot of people don't know this, but the main architectural theme of the memorial is unity, the rope that you might see braided around the entire memorial. I thought this was a perfect time to speak with Jennifer Ryan, whose book focuses on the friendship, which you could also call unity, that defined early British culture during the war. It was our greatest generation and our greatest struggle. It produced our greatest victory. And it's really great to talk to a storyteller like that today. So thank you, Ms. Ryan, for being here. Jennifer, I'm sorry. Thank you, Jennifer.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and it's great to be doing this event in partnership with the Friends of the National World War II Memorial. Thank you.
So yes, as mentioned, please type questions into the chat as they arise, but The Kitchen Front just came out on February 23rd, has been a wonderful book, and I'm just full of questions about it. This book describes a cooking contest hosted by the BBC in Britain in 1942, and the way that lives intersect and transmute through this contest, lives that have already been touched by the war. It's a beautiful book. It's a page turner. But Jennifer, I know that this is based on a lot of your own personal history and stories. Mrs. Quince in the book and your grandmother share a first name. I was wondering if you could talk about how that family experience might have shaped Mrs. Quince as a character and your whole creative writing process, this being your third book in that era.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I think my grandmother definitely inspired this book. She was a great cook. You know, I think every family has this auspicious cook, you know, this auspicious lady who can, you know, everyone, oh, she's the master of taste and flavor, she was always counted on to do those very tricky recipes and everything. But she cooked in a very different way to my mother. And I think as a child, I was always aware of this, that she used a lot of offal in her cooking. She really depended a lot on flavoring rather than the quality of the meat, for instance. And it wasn't because of poverty or anything. I realized it was because of the rations. There was a lot of pastry in her cooking. She made the most amazing pies, and it's all these different flavors that come together that made me, when I started really looking into the Second World War with my first book, I realized that it was rationing that went on till 1954 in the UK, and that had really, really shaped her cooking, and in a lot of ways made her into a much better, and that generation of women into a completely different type of cook, very creative, but it was all about using ingredients to their very, very best. And so she very much inspired this book. And also I'm lucky enough to have a copy of her recipe book, which is just this amazing. I think it's so wonderful to have this like passed down from generation to generation. It's almost like a DNA, a piece of DNA that goes from one generation to another. But this old book, and it's just full of all these, it's just sort of slipped in all these different leaflets and cut out recipes from magazines and things like that. And then on the recipes themselves, most of them are handwritten in and spelt really badly. And they quite often they have little additions that she's made in pencil or a different colored pen in different ways, and different oven temperature, and everything. And it's just fascinating. You can see the evolution of each recipe as she has perfected it every single time that she's made it. It's absolutely a masterpiece. Anyway, so I had this as well at my disposal, and then I did an awful lot of research about these incredibly creative ways that cooks in the Second World War made do with all the rationing and shortages. There were massive amounts of shortages, so they were attempting to, create their normal food and their normal dishes, but also they were quite willing to try new things. And so that's kind of where it all started. I decided on having the format of a cooking contest because it really showcased, it gave me the opportunity to showcase all these different ways that you could, how cooks in those days would do different techniques, use different ingredients in different ways in order to feed their families or feed other people. And that's quite how the whole cooking contest came about.
Yeah, it was, I thought, a brilliant narrative device. We do have a question from the group, so I might have jumped right into it, been overexcited. Can you give us an overview of the book before we start talking about Mrs. Quince, maybe, although Miss Quince is a great character. But
oh, well, thank you. So the book it's set in 1941, which was potentially the worst year for food rations in the UK. And that basically before the war, 60% of food came from abroad, and suddenly, because of the war, because the ships couldn't come in with food anymore because of the U-boats, they had to really restrict the amount of food that everyone had. So they had everyone got a ration book. So basically the premise of the book is there's a cooking contest where you can only use rationed food, and there's 4 women, and they're all professional cooks of one sort or another, and they all decide to compete in this big opportunity for them. So there's 3 rounds to the contest and 3 parts to the book. Part 1 is the starter round. Part 2 is the main course, and part 3 is the dessert. And at the end of each one of these parts, you have, the show, which carried on. All of this happens in a village in just south of London, and it all happens. Each round closes in the village hall. The prize is for the woman to become the first co-host for a BBC radio show called The Kitchen Front, which goes out every morning. And that's actually based on a real, true story, in the fact that there was a real program called The Kitchen Front. At the beginning of the war, it was hosted by a male travel show host. And they quickly realized that he didn't really, he wasn't engaging with the women, mostly women listeners, because obviously the program was really going towards cooks and housewives. And so they decided to bring in women. And they chose professional cooks from different walks of life. And that's how I based my characters. So my 4 characters are very different. The first one is Audrey, and she's a housewife, but she's a widow, a young widow. Her husband died much earlier on in the year. She's got 3 children who she's desperately trying to bring up in a normal way, but she's incredibly in debt, and her house is a very old house and it's falling down around her as well. And she is absolutely petrified that they're going to be thrown out of the house. The debt collectors are going to come in. So she started this business, this baking business, home baking business, and she's busy trying to hold everything together. She's absolutely exhausted baking, growing all her own vegetables, and all the hens for the eggs and everything. And she's got a pig sty with pigs and everything. And she's busy just trying to hold it all together. And she desperately wants to win because it'll just give her a bit of an income, a solid income that can help to pay her debts. So the second character is her younger sister, actually, who is has become the lady of the manor in the big manor house just down the road in the village. And she is married to an incredibly wealthy industrialist, but she's very lonely, and he bullies her, and she's trying to prove her worth as a home economist. Now, home economists were employed by the Ministry of Food in order to go to village and town halls around the country and demonstrate recipes, wartime recipes that used an awful lot of ingredients that were not rationed. So she was doing this in a professional status. So she really wanted to win this in order to prove her worth to her husband, who was continually putting her down. The third character is her kitchen maid in the manor house, Nell, who's 19 years old, and she's an orphan. This is the only job she's been in. She's been in this job since she was 14 years old. She's got Mrs. Quince is the old cook, who's very old and has taught her everything that she knows, and she depends on this woman and is petrified of going out in the real world. But at the same time, she's got all the credentials of a real cook, and part of her just yearns for freedom from servitude. So there's her, and then the last one is Zelda, who's a very characterful restaurant chef. So she's about 30 years old, and she's actually pregnant, and she's trying to conceal it. She's single, and she doesn't really know what she's going to do. And she's been stationed down in the village doing war work, and being the head chef in a canteen factory. So those are the four different characters, and they all have different problems that they think that this winning this contest is going to solve. So they've got each of them have a lot at stake to win each of these rounds. Yeah.
Oh, and I said yes. I was on mute. And yes, so much going on in this book. And you mentioned this is a village to the south of London. This is the village you grew up in, correct?
It's not. It's this is based on it's just a fictional place, but it would be close to where I grew up.
Look,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And by the end of the book, we really get a sense of things are changing in this society. When you were growing up, did you sense that change that had come about from this titanic conflict that had occurred?
I did. Yeah. No, you can. As I say, I think that there was the Second World War. I mean, people spoke about it. It was nostalgia when I was a child, very much. It was women, particularly because it was a moment of huge freedom for them. I think before then, women were still sort of subjugated. And I think I read this wonderful journal that was written during the era by a 50-year-old woman. And she had grown-up sons who had gone to war. And it was just the most moving story. Her husband was very antisocial and controlling. And so every day she would have to make lunch for him. And he never wanted to go out and meet other people or anything else like that. So she had to stay at home. Then she would go out to the shops and buy the food to come home and make dinner for him. And she would clean up that. And she would take to her bed in the afternoon because she had a really bad headache. She suffered from headaches a lot, and she was a bit depressed. Anyway, the war came along, and she joined the Women's Voluntary Service, which is for older women or married women. It was a way that they could join in local voluntary services towards the war without signing up for anything or having to be sent away. And she became very involved in that. And soon she stopped. It just gave her that whole different lease of life. She got so much confidence from it. She suddenly had this community of friends, and they were all working for this big effort. And she became in charge of a canteen, a mobile canteen, which is basically a van where one side goes up and they can kind of give out tea and coffee and snacks and everything. And it was basically for soldiers on the move or people kind of clearing up parties for bombed out areas and things like that. So incredibly useful. And she was doing this all the time, to the point where her husband kept saying, I don't think you should be doing this anymore because it's starting to impact on my life. And she said, but it's to do with the war. I have to do it. We're all in the same boat. It kind of almost gave her this excuse almost. And then there was this one day, and this was a couple of years into the war, there was this one day she was doing all this incredible work, very, very useful work. And she said that she didn't come home and make her husband his lunch. She left it on the sideboard in the kitchen. And I don't know, at that moment, you just felt like going, yeah, hooray, well done, that she's managed to do this. She's sort of broken free. And anyway, her husband was absolutely livid. He was really not happy about it. But what can you say? Anyway, so after that, she really, really kind of came into her own and became really quite a leader within the organization. And she had a big a group of friends through it. And she also very regularly went to visit the bereaved people as well in her area as well. So she did a lot of charity work and voluntary work like that. And at the end of the journal, at the end of the war, she actually said, I have vowed to myself and never ever going to let a man, especially my husband, control me in any way. And she specifically said that. And I think that that really sums up how women's lives just changed hugely. I think that really describes it well.
Yeah, yeah. And through this book, it's expressed through the cooking they do in many ways. We have a question from the audience. Could you talk more about the recipes in the book? And I'll have a little follow-up to this one, but this book is full of recipes that come from the rationed times and from all the struggles they were dealing with. What was your experience with recipes like this?
So a lot of them came actually out of my grandmother's recipe book, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, she was still making some of these recipes. Obviously, if it was,
Maybe the wild hare, perhaps, or
no, I don't know, because hair has been outlawed. You can't,
oh, okay.
It's now illegal to shoot hair or
Fair
to
enough.
catch
Well, I
them.
knew it was
But
illegal
at the
to
time it wasn't. At the
Yeah.
time not. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so a lot of them came from leaflets, government leaflets as well. So there's a place in London. I had to take a trip over to London to go to the National Archives, where I found an awful lot of there's a lot of recipe cards. I mean, the Ministry of Food, there was a special ministry for the Second World War called the Ministry of Food, because the government realized at the beginning of the war that there was going to be a really big problem with food shortages. And so they set up this whole system of the Ministry of Agriculture basically went to every farm and told them what they had to grow. And meat production was very much curtailed, because given the land quantity that we had, it was better to produce crops such as wheat and, mostly wheat, actually. So that's why meat was very much rationed. You just didn't really have very much of it because it wasn't being produced very much. And the same with dairy products. There really wasn't very much dairy products, actually, for exactly the same reason. So the Ministry of Food was basically supposed to be organizing who got what and everything. And it was all very good, very well proportioned, and said, right, okay, people can live on this. They can live on that. They'll be healthy. It's a very healthy diet and everything. But the problem was that no one really knew how to cook using any of these things. They wouldn't be able to cook their normal recipes. So you have this huge effort that went into showing housewives and cooks what they could do, how they could substitute meat for other vegetables, or smaller amounts of meat, or different types of meat, or different types of protein foods. Cooking oil was another massive problem, because there was no butter, there was no cooking oil was very difficult to get hold of and rationed. Margarine was rationed. So there was an awful lot of effort put into how to make pastry without butter. And mostly they used to use mashed potatoes. But quite often people would also use other meat fats as well, might be available. So there's, suet and lard and everything. Pork fat particularly was used. So there's an awful lot of that. Sugar is the other thing that was a big problem during the war, and there's a couple of recipes in there that I think show how different ways that you can actually get the sweetness out. Cooked carrots was a really big thing that was pushed to try and get sweetness. Yeah, get extra sweetness into food. Yeah. So sorry, I think I've gone off so back to the recipes.
Well, you mentioned the carrots, and it reminded me of the carrot popsicles that you've written about
Oh
before.
yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
I mean
yeah,
that sounds kind of good to me. Uh, but
yeah. There's this
yeah,
wonderful photograph of these little kids, these little toddlers, and they're standing, and they've got a stick, and instead of being like a popsicle on top, it's got a carrot, and they're just eating the carrot. It's such a
that's
sweet
wild.
picture.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite recipe in the book? If I were to cook tonight, what what should I make out of the book?
So I think my particular favorite is the hare actually. I haven't done it with hare, I've done it with duck breast, and it works really, really well. I
It
love
looks
that.
really good.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
know what? I actually took that recipe from, it's actually a real 18th century recipe. So
18th century.
this one is not, this one is the slightly different one in the book, because now the kitchen maid finds these old recipe books at the bottom in the cellars in the manor, and she finds this wonderful starter as her starter for the cooking contest. Um, and but how does she get the hare? That's the question. So anyway, but she makes it. But it is, I found the real recipe out of a genuine 18th century book. So that was quite fun. But that's a lovely recipe. I like the spam and game pie as well. That's a
Oh
really
yeah,
good one.
yeah.
And
Could probably make that one with modern ingredients, I think.
I didn't make it with spam.
Okay.
I have to say I didn't. Um, but the hominy pie is delicious.
Yeah.
That's a big favorite. It's basically a bit like a quiche,
Mm.
but you just put anything inside it and you bind it up with a bit of egg. The thing it was invented by land girls working in farms, and what they did was they would use their leftovers and make some pastry, whip up a bit of pastry, put the leftovers in and any spare vegetables that they had, bind it up with a bit of egg if they had an egg, and some cheese if they had a bit of cheese, put it in the oven, and then they would take it with them for their lunch. So it's an absolutely delicious pie.
Yeah, it's a great way to start off the book. I think it might be the first recipe in there, but yeah, I'm sort of a novice cook, if I may flatter myself by even calling myself a novice. But the book is full of these amazing descriptions of the cooking that is happening. You mentioned, being low on sugar, and they strain the sugar beets through to create sweeteners. What did you think that the cooking expressed about the characters, the theme, the setting that they were in? For someone that doesn't understand all the cooking terms, what should I be understanding about the miracles that they were able to work in the kitchen?
So I think for all the different characters, they approach it in a different way. So Audrey has got this back garden that's just full of vegetables. She's got hens that lay their own eggs. She has a pig, although nothing really happens to the pig, so don't worry there. And then she starts keeping bees as well. So she's got all of these extra resources that she draws upon. Now, a lot of people in the countryside during the Second World War did this. This was a very big part of where they got food. And in addition to this, Audrey has got the wild as well. She understands the woods like the back of her hand. She knows where she can find fresh herbs, mushrooms, where she can catch various animals and things. She understands that, and as I said, a lot of people in the countryside used to go, and there was a lot of fishing, there was a lot of poaching. There was there was a lot of people, eating wild stuff as well. It's fascinating, that whole element of the war. And in so whereas Gwendolyn, her sister, who's the home economist, she doesn't really understand food that well. She's much more of a sort of person who follows recipes, and she struggles a lot more with where to get the food to be able to win a competition. But one of her first recipes is hilarious, actually, is that she uses one of the Ministry of War recipes, and of course it's not really good enough. It's meant for day-to-day cooking, and it's not really good enough to win a contest. So she got a tin of sardines, and you drain out the oil, and you use the oil to make pastry, and then you mush the sardines up inside the pastry, and you roll them up and then slice them a bit like you would a cinnamon roll, and then you bake them. And yes, as you can imagine, the pastry is very fishy, and the whole experience is very salty. But that's a genuine Ministry of Food recipe. And
really,
yeah. But that's the kind of cook that she is. Whereas Nell, the kitchen maid, is much more of an organic cook. She really understands food and recipes very well, and in a way quite a traditional cook. And Zelda, the restaurant chef, is cordon bleu trained, as she reminds everyone all the time. And she's continually trying to reproduce these high-end dishes by substituting other ingredients and everything. And I think she does very well on the whole. But so they're all, I kind of wanted to showcase all the different ways that cooks use different techniques in order to approach it.
Yeah, definitely. It's inspiring just to see all the things that they can put together. Your research for this book, was it different from previous ones? This is a question from the audience as well.
So I think that all my research just kind of builds up upon itself, if you know what I mean. I already knew an awful lot about the Second World War before I wrote my first book, but I read an awful lot then about women, and in a way it was a part of something I'd read a very long time ago that really formed this basis for this idea of women becoming a family together. A long time ago, in a book that I read for my first book, I read that there was this wonderful story about two women who met in a maternity hospital when they were giving birth. And when they became friends, they were in the next beds and they became friends. And then after they went home, one of them, their house was bombed, so they became homeless. So she wrote to the other one, because she remembered that she lived in the countryside and had quite a big house, and said, would you be able to put me up for a while? And she said, yeah, of course you can come, but in return, could you help me out by looking after my children as well, so that I can go out to work? And so she got a job locally, and the other mother stayed at home and looked after all the children. And then shortly afterwards, another woman came and joined them with her children as well. And so there were three women living together. Two of them were working, and I think between them they had about 7 children. One of them would look after all of the children, and they stayed like that for the rest of the war, because all the men were at war, all their husbands and were away. So I love that idea, and that's kind of one of the places that I was starting from with this novel.
Yeah, that's very evocative of events that happen in the novel. Would you say that was your first sort of seed of the idea to create this?
No, I don't think so. I think the beginning was just the cooking. I really wanted to write a book about the cooking, and then that part came a bit later when I was thinking about, the characters and bringing them together, and what was going to happen between them. Yeah.
Oh, certainly. And the BBC itself plays a large role in this book, I would say. I'd never heard that nickname before, the Beeb.
Yeah.
I thought, what was your experience with the BBC like in relation to their work in the 40s? What did you feel that legacy as you were writing and as you were researching?
Yeah, it was a very interesting time it was basically, it was a really interesting show, actually, The Kitchen Front, because it was the BBC kind of wanted this program, and they thought that it was a really great thing, that it was what listeners wanted to listen to, and it was very useful for war purposes as well, to be sharing information like this. Every day they would give out information about what was available in the shops. So if they'd had a big shipment of salt cod in from the Atlantic, for instance, they would tell housewives, and it would go out at 8 o'clock or so in the morning, so that it would be before the housewives went to the shops, and they could then say, oh, this salt cod is available. Here is a recipe for what to do with salt cod. And then they would read out the recipe and, expect housewives to sort of sit there and take notes down about what to do with it. But the Ministry of Food had a massive input in this. And there was this continual battle between them, because the Kitchen Front, the BBC, didn't want the Ministry of Food to be running this program. They wanted it to be an interesting, program that they were running, but the Ministry of Food wanted it to be a little bit more dictatorial. Yeah. So there was this continual battle between them. It's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it went on till 1956, the rationing?
Yeah, it's 1954. Yeah. So gradually, little by little, things started coming off the rations, but it was 1954, and that was meat. Meat was on the ration until 1954. Other things were on the ration as well, so clothes, furniture, a lot of things were rationed in different ways.
Really? Wow. Clothes and furniture too. Why is that?
Clothes, because the most of fabric comes from abroad in the UK, in much the same way as food was before the Second World War, and they needed it for uniforms.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah.
We do have another question from the chat. The name of the favorite pie again, which I believe was the homily pie, correct? It was Audrey's homily pie.
That's right. Yeah.
Homily pie.
Yes. Yeah.
If you don't mind, I'm curious about how these pandemic times have affected your process. You wrote a fascinating blog about it. I assume you were working on this book, correct? Or
no, I wasn't. No.
Oh, no.
I've been working on another book. Yeah. So
yeah. Okay. So you described a tangent that the plot of the book had gone on, but it was not this one. I was curious about the tangent. I was wondering if we could learn more about Paolo or something like that.
Oh, that is wonderful. No, this book never really went on any tangents. I really had a very strong idea of the characters and what was going to happen right from the beginning. Actually, it was very it was a wonderful, wonderful book to write, actually, I have to say. I really enjoyed it, although there are some very emotional parts of it which were obviously difficult to write. Yeah, obviously.
There are a lot of emotional parts. Did you have a favorite moment to write in the book, or a most emotional moment?
So I'm not going to give away any hints here, but I love the end of the contest.
The end of the contest, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But we can't say anything.
No, we can't say anything. Yes, as we discussed before, Gertrude, I thought Gertrude the hen and Audrey's memories of her husband were really beautiful. And I think Zelda's moment towards the end there was really beautiful as well. But yeah, it's amazing the way the emotions flow through the book, along with the plot and the setting as well. It ties into something we've gotten from the audience. How did those communities change, agricultural communities change, based on all the rationing and everything that was going on at the time? Did you come across that in your research?
Yeah, so there was a massive change anyway, because a lot of the men had gone to war. So there was a shortage of manpower on the farms, which is why you had land girls working on the farms. But even with land girls, there was generally a big shortage. Now, there were some prisoners of war that we see in this book, actually, who were used, and they were posted in farms so that they could actually help with the farm work. But a lot of these communities, they just were bereft of young men, so that was very different. But they were also growing very different things. As I say, the Ministry of Agriculture was incredibly strict with farms, that they should grow particular things, which obviously also impacted on manpower as well. So yeah, I think it had this massive change within communities, particularly on farmers. Now, farm work was actually a reserved occupation, so they didn't actually have to go to war, but a lot of them wanted to, because they wanted to do their bit for the country. So you ended up with quite a few farmers' wives, even sort of just trying to hold it together. And I read some amazing stories about, how, a dear old, quite often an older woman who was just, holding together a very large farm single-handedly. So yeah, so there's an awful, there was a huge change. But also, I think for women, particularly in this era, I mean, there was massive freedom. Once all the men had gone, all the husbands and fathers, teenagers' fathers had gone, there was suddenly an awful lot more freedom. There was a lot of dances. There was an awful lot of there was a lot more free love. I mean, people were, they were getting bombed and they were going off to war. They were getting killed. And I think when you can see that your life is in danger, you're going to take chances that you probably wouldn't have done otherwise, and enjoy your life just in case, it might be cut short. So there's an awful lot more of that as well. And particularly in towns and villages, small towns and villages, you had an awful lot of dances going on in the village halls and everything, a lot more entertainment. And then you had the Americans as well. The GIs came to town, and they caused an awful lot of excitement for an awful lot of local women. Yeah.
Well, you're walking right into another question from the audience, which is, since so much of the history of World War II is told from a male's perspective, was it difficult to find information on women during the war? And do you see your book as having an impact on that dialogue where we're trying to bring these narratives back together in how we talk about these times?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think I think if you look up World War II, you're just going to get battles and battles and battles and spies and things like that. And I think it is. I think it's great. I think there's actually quite a few non-fiction books out there about women in the war. I think that more of them are coming out now than were around before, and there's more fiction around as well, which is great. I love that era, and it's just lovely to read it sort of brought to life, you know, through fiction and through movies and TV shows and everything. So yeah, so
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more about that? How fiction and nonfiction should interact when dealing with historical subjects?
so so I used to be a nonfiction editor, in a and I always I always felt strongly that every form of nonfiction should sort of have a narrative running through it, even if it isn't about people. It should really sort of follow an almost a storyline in itself.
Mhm.
And I love that fiction just brings it to life. You know, it takes that same nonfiction book and it just brings it breathes air into it. It gives it character and personality. And what better way to learn about history than to read a story and become enmeshed in this life, in this little life of this village. I think it's a wonderful thing that historical fiction is able to do.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the way you explicate these lives, especially personally for me, Audrey's experience as a war widow, and just understanding her day to day and with her sons, and you know, so much of that in nonfiction, I think, gets sort of, it's just expressed through numbers and statistics and not through these stories that, I mean, you know, it's somebody's day, it's their 24/7 that they're trying to work through. And it's beautiful to explore it through fiction, I think. We do have another non-fictional question from the audience, asking, were food prices extremely high during the war? And the book, I think, touches on this a little, this competition between availability and the money that's coming into a family.
Yeah, so that was the whole point of rationing, actually, was that what the government was worried about at the beginning of the war was that food prices, if left to market conditions, would just go up. And so therefore the poor would really suffer and starve, probably, to be honest. And they couldn't have that. What they were really worried about was a country that wasn't eating properly is going to be unhealthy, and it's going to not support the war effort. And at that time, they were really worried that Hitler was going to walk in, was going to invade.
Mm-hmm.
And it was absolutely imperative that everyone was on board, you know, with the whole war effort. So the whole rationing, what was behind rationing was that if you made food and the prices were set by the government for each type of food, and it was made available to everybody, but you had to use a ration book, so you could only buy a certain amount of it. And by doing that, they basically worked out that everyone would be able to afford this, and everyone would be able to have a healthy diet, if not a very exciting one. But everyone would be able to afford it. It was priced in a way that everyone could eat properly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank heavens for small blessings, I suppose. Did you ever eat any of these mock creams? And
Oh my goodness, that is such a good question. The mock recipes are just insane. So let me just explain that it was the idea of the mock recipes is that they want to replace one of the main ingredients with something else. So mock goose, for example, was goose stuffing shaped into a roast goose kind of shape, and they would put a couple of strips of rashers of bacon over the top and bake it in the oven. And the idea was that this was in the place of a roast goose. So there was quite a few mock recipes. There was mock cream. There were a lot of different types of mock cream. My favorite one is that it was actually just a roux sauce, like a white roux sauce that was left to go cold.
okay.
Yeah, which I don't think would have been very nice at all. Cream was absolutely not available during the Second World War. It was dairies were not allowed to produce it because it used up too much resources.
It sounds like such a struggle to replicate these things. I mean, that's and some of the things, like it's mock chicken, mock roast chicken.
Yeah, mock roast chicken was similar to the goose, actually. Yeah, very similar to the goose. But my personal favorite is mock banana, which is roast turnip, parsnip, which is quite a sweet flavor when it's cooked. Cooked parsnip mushed up with a little bit of sugar and banana essence, if you can get it. So really, it was just mashed parsnip, and they would pretend that was banana.
How did they even eat that?
So apparently in those days, a banana sandwich was very common. That would have been I
like a banana sandwich too. I'm from Tennessee, so Elvis used to eat banana sandwiches all the time. Yeah, peanut butter and banana. But, yeah. From Amy G in the audience, this is a great question. Can you tell us a bit about what you're working on next?
So I'm still working on my next novel, and I don't think I should really say anything until it's done and dusted.
Yeah,
but thank you for the question.
Well, maybe that's the novel that they've been working on during the pandemic. Maybe, if you don't have to say. Okay. Yeah. How has it been working in the pandemic?
It's you know what, I work at home, in front of my laptop all the time anyway, so it's not really, that part of it hasn't changed. I have the children around a lot, which is great actually in some ways, and in other ways I don't know, I wish that they would have something a little bit more, see their friends and things like that, and have a bit more teacher time and things.
Certainly. I wish the cats would go see their friends sometimes, but we are looking forward to it. Can you indicate, will it be another historical fiction again? Or
it is, yeah. So it's once again set in the Second World War, and and it involves some women. Yeah. It's great fun. It's got some lovely characters as well, and a bit of romance, as well, which isn't in the kitchen front. There isn't really very much romance at all in the kitchen front. So.
I felt like there was a lot. I was very swept up in it.
Oh, really? Oh, that's great to hear. That's great.
Yeah, we've got Paolo and Chef James, and it was good for me. Well, it's been a wonderful talk. If we have last questions in the chat, please do submit them. But I was wondering, Jennifer, if you could say, when somebody, Oh, wait, sorry. Let me give Kathy a chance. How did you make the switch from editor to writer?
Oh, so after I gave birth to my second child, actually, I suddenly realized, because I had a bit of time off work, and I realized, this is a really great time to do something it gives something a whirl that I always wanted to try. So I did it. I went and I did a part-time master's degree in the evenings at Johns Hopkins, just up the road here.
Mhm.
And it was great fun, and it was a real, yeah, it's just been great fun. And while I was there, I was working on the Chilbury Ladies Choir. So
Oh,
um
yeah, okay.
yeah, so that's what happened. Yeah, it's been a really fun transition from, yeah.
You've really, turned it on. The 3 novels so far. That's great. Are you a singer as well? I was curious about that.
Well, I love to sing in choirs. I don't think I'd
Okay.
be like, I'm
Yeah,
not the
I
next
love to sing in the
Beyonce.
yeah. How can I get a signed copy? Asks Halit Broza, not me. Asks Halit. She,
Well, with the pandemic, it's quite difficult at the moment, but soon, very soon, they'll be available. So
that's great. Yeah, that'd
yeah,
be
that
great.
they'll be very available soon, or yeah, maybe email Politics and Prose about that.
Yes, well, and thank you to Politics and Prose for putting this on. I think that we've got the audience questions all taken care of. I've got most of mine taken care of. So we'll save it for book number 4. Maybe I'll come back and circle
Oh,
back on some cushion front. But yes, thank you, Politics and Prose. If you'd like to take us out today.
thank you very much, and
Thank you, Jim.
thanks to Politics and Prose as well. It's been really, really fun.
Absolutely. And thank you both for this wonderful discussion. I'd like to thank also everyone who has participated, our viewing audience. Please join us again in the future for other upcoming events, and we hope you all have a good day.